Let's create a pivotal impact. Friends in the industry, Josh Hannabury here, your host of the Truck Focus podcast. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered what different types of training opportunities exist within the transportation industry? Furthermore, have you wondered about what progression opportunities exist in our industry that allow someone to navigate our industry and have a very successful career? So in today's episode, I'm really excited to bring back my mentor, Erik Sherman, Chieff Strategist with Pioneer Safety Solutions, as we discuss some of the opportunities that do exist in the industry in regards to in-class training, hands-on training, competency, career progression, and a lot more. I also want to give a huge shout out to the team at Pioneer Safety Solutions, an organization that helps craft customized safety solutions suited for each client. So definitely learn more by visiting pioneersafetysolutions.com. Before we get started, I do want to say thank you so much to all of our dedicated listeners. And if this is the first time you've ever checked out a Truck Focus podcast, I really welcome you to our community. I do ask that you like this episode and share it out, as Erik and I shed some light on some different opportunities I believe a lot of people need to know. I look forward to the impact this conversation is going to have. Let's get to it. Back to the Truck Focus podcast. Really excited for today as I get to have someone back who is gracious enough to join when we first started the podcast just over a year ago, Mr. Erik Sherman. I'm super grateful for a few things. I have a world of respect for Erik and just the impact that he's had on my personal and professional journey over the last couple of years. We've worked closely together on a handful of initiatives, projects, advocacies, where I really admire the fact that two things. So first, Erik he's really able to take when I ramble, hear what I have to say, and clearly communicate it out. I think that's something where I need, and I'm really grateful that he has that ability. But the second is he's a visionary. So he can see 6 steps ahead when we're faced with something that could feel like chaos. It's a hornet's nest. He's able to say, okay, here's that queen hornet. We're going to place it here, and that's how you execute. So 2 really huge things for myself, because it does help me in this journey. He's been really involved behind the scenes with the Truck Focus podcast, with Pivotal, and I know he's up to some really cool stuff that I'll let him share. I'm really excited that he took the time on this beautiful Sunday to join me. So welcome, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually not much of a beautiful Sunday. He's totally lying. If I look outside my window, there is like a snowfall warning and 20 centimeters of snow coming down in Edmonton. Yesterday was +7. The day before was +7. I could canoe down the street. People who live in Edmonton know what I'm talking about because of the windrows. But thanks, man. It's a pleasure to chat. And I just, before we get started, want to say you are probably looking about 3x pro on what you're producing these days. Good job. That is quite the progression. Quite the show, dude.
Appreciate that. So first off, we'll start with the snow. So that's why you don't live in Edmonton. No, I'm just kidding. But okay, well, I was looking outside in the corner of my eye, noticing that it's beautiful. So I wasn't lying, but those that get to enjoy snow on March 20th, you're welcome. And no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. And honestly, so yourself and Chris with Compliance Box were really, I would say, mindful, careful, but really vocal to say, Josh, you need to grow. And part of that, honestly, is camera quality, audio quality, obviously. So the feedback, because that's obviously the goal, is you got to just keep getting better to create a bigger impact. So thank you for that.
You bet, man. You bet.
Yeah. Why don't you give us an overview of just the last few years? If you want to talk about conception and industry till today or wherever, but give us an overview just for those that haven't listened to, I think it was episode like 14 or 15 when you first hopped on, of who is Erik Sherman. And can you give us an overview of what you're up to today?
Yeah, sure. So who is Erik Sherman is actually a really tough question because, like everybody, things just kind of change and grow over time, and you figure out where your strengths are and where your interests lie. And if you're smart, you figure out a way to get closer to those strengths and kind of really develop that knowledge and the skills and become better at what you want to do so that you can slowly start to get other people to pay you to do the stuff that you enjoy doing. And so, my career has gone back now, probably, I want to say around 18 years at this point. And, a lot of it was spent in transportation doing and when I say in transportation, that's a big kind of broad thing to say, I'll nail that down a little deeper in a second, but but most of it was spent on occupational health and safety. I learned coming up through the ranks. I spent some time as a driver, not a ton of time. I think in the end, I drove for about 2.5 years. And it's not a clear, obvious path, but at the time, it seemed like a really good fit for my life. And so anyway, as I moved into health and safety, I was working with carriers, mostly oil and gas, and on that exploration side. So moving drilling rigs, whether they were, large drilling rigs, small rigs, even some service equipment and heavy equipment, right? That's really where it all kind of started, the genesis of it. From there, it just kind of grew into more of an oil and gas kind of midstream focus, right? I went to work for a company called Gibson Energy, worked for them for a few years up in Grand Prairie, looking after a region there, and that extended up into northern BC. And I got to meet a lot of really cool people and do a lot of really neat things. I think probably one of the best things about the transportation industry, and the reason why I keep kind of gravitating back to it, is there's so much going on. There's so many different aspects to the sector that you can't get bored, which serves me well, because as I've progressed through my career, I've discovered I hate being bored. One thing that I really, really enjoy doing is learning new things so that I can tackle a completely new sometimes problem that I've never faced before. And, the learning isn't always something that you can do in a classroom. A lot of times you have to do it on the job. And that's another thing transportation offers a lot of, is on the job training. You don't always learn the right way to do it the first time, but if you're smart, you'll figure it out, and you'll be doing it the right way eventually, right? So there's a lot of introspection that comes with trying to learn where you're doing well and where you're not. Career progresses. I left Gibson Energy, and I spent some time in heavy construction, mobile cranes, things like that, specialized heavy haul, before I went consulting for the first time around. And one of the things that really kind of stood out the first round of consulting, 2016, 2017, was, in a lot of ways, I tried to do the same things that I was doing for my previous employer, but just kind of in small chunks, small blocks. Like my target demographic, my target clients were those small carriers or accidental carriers, as we discussed the last time around, that didn't really have functional programs. They didn't really have a good sense of what they were doing. They needed some assistance, but they couldn't hire somebody who was truly competent because they just didn't have the payroll for it. And that's also very, very common in our industry. I learned a lot about myself in that. I really enjoy working with startups. I really enjoy working with small businesses. There's something about the culture. There's something about that environment that really promotes innovation. It promotes, that whole learning experience that I was talking about earlier. And so I took that to working with AMTA, and I worked with AMTA for just about 4 years or so. In my time with AMTA, I was looking after the Health and Safety Association's functions. That's, your education side, your industry outreach and injury reduction side, your quality assurance core program. And overseeing that stuff gave me a very clear view as to where these resources were being used well and where they weren't. And oftentimes where they weren't was because people didn't know it was there. It's either just not being targeted to them in the communications, or we're talking about carriers that are too small to be focusing on these types of things, which to them are kind of in their periphery, right? They're just out of sight. So, they end up not utilizing a lot of the things that they're already paying for through their WCB premiums, right? So any carriers that are listening to this, strongly encourage you. You're paying through your WCB premiums for a safety association. Learn what it's there to do. AMTA is there to do things. So learn what that is and really squeeze the value out of it because it's there. I left AMTA and I figured, you know what? This last year, I've put a strong focus into what I really enjoyed, which was working with those small carriers, the small employers, typically the fast growth, small to medium-sized employers in the transportation space, or seeking to enter the transportation space as a service or as a vendor or supplier of services. and products. And a lot of the focus has been on business development, business strategy, management consulting, a lot less on occupational health and safety and carrier compliance. Now, that's not to say that I'm not still dealing with some of those things. In fact, we'll talk about it closer to the end of the podcast, but I am still engaging in some of that stuff. It's just mostly focused on how do you get good product market fit? How do you really explore what your real value is, or what the focus of your business should be, what your strategy is, and then how you execute on it in a way that ensures success, right? So that has been a lot of fun.
From an outsider looking in the industry, they don't see a lot of, I would say, the opportunities that actually exist that keep people in the industry. Because often, like, a number one complaint that I honestly hear is, why would I drive? I don't want to drive forever. It's like, you don't have to drive forever, but how many people that's an entry point? We're both results of that, where it's like, okay, it fits my lifestyle right now, pays decent, okay, good hours, good income, got family support. And then from there, your head is on a swivel on, okay, there's this opportunity. And I remember the first time I met a safety person. I'm like, a who? You a what? Like, you care if I wear what? Like, just that in itself to me was like, oh, shattered. It was just like, blew my mind. But then you hear from operations, and then operations has 9 million divisions that you could really, okay, it's a level up. Let's level up to this position. Maybe it's dispatch, or maybe it's a coordinator of some kind. But you really did I'd say, a great job creating that. Like, in my mind as you're speaking, I'm like, okay, there's opportunities here, there's opportunities here, but you're always progressing. So those are two things in the industry people miss if they're not looking.
Let me expand on that for 2 seconds, because I think that's a really important miss industry wide. We do a phenomenal job of trying to plug the benefits of driving. But, let's be real on that. It's a really difficult plug. 9 times out of 10, if you're talking to somebody about being a truck driver, they're going to view it as a dead end job. They're probably not wanting to invest in a license for the purpose of doing this until the day they retire, because, well, let's be honest, as you get older, do you really want to be behind the wheel 15 hours? Do you really want to be tying down cargo in the middle of the night? Do you want to be throwing on chains out on a lease road somewhere? There's a lot of reasons why somebody wouldn't want to stick with it for the long haul. And this is an excellent segue into how many dispatchers used to drive, how many supervisors used to drive, managers, owners. A lot of these companies are started by drivers. People like you and I who have some driving experience, have managed to leverage that driving experience to fit into the organization in a way that says, I understand your operation. I understand the goals of your operation. I understand some of the specifics around your needs. And I have these problems I can fix for you, or I can resolve. But, from just a driver's perspective, how do we pitch to drivers that, this is just an entryway into the industry that can take you down so many paths of opportunity? If we can figure that out, we can fix a lot of the messaging around why somebody should become a professional truck driver.
Well, you hit one of the nails on the head when you talked about on-the-job learning, where not everything's going to be learned in a classroom environment. And when you look at a lot of different industries just in society, you take a 4-year education in this, you're going to enter that space. You may take, as a requirement of your degree, you may have to do, say, 30 hours a year or whatever of upkeep. I think on-the-job learning is one of the best tools for adults that's available, for the ultimate reasons is most adults have some form of commitments outside of the day-to-day job, where if it's family, if it's you like to travel, you got sports, you got a second job, whatever it is. So the fact that, our industry, I think, has done a really good job in identifying that. And when I say our industry, and transportation, as we're going to talk about, is so broad, but there are so many opportunities. If it's online training, it's a 6-hour course that can be done in 3 days. If it's like, hey, I'm going to be in the classroom from 8 to 5 for the next 3 days, whatever it is. But then that knowledge that you learned in class, you have the opportunity then to go say, okay, I'm going to apply it in the field. So that way I'm actually, yes, I'm competent in what I just learned. I just finished the CVSA training. To me, that was...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, honestly. So when I'm asked some feedback for that, to me, I put it into 3 buckets of perspective. So the first bucket is I've been in industry basically my entire working career. So you can read what law says, if we stay in the term law, regulation, legislation, whatever. I read what the law says. I'm going to apply it the best that I can. That's industry's perspective. Then you have an auditing perspective, and a very high overview of auditing is you're looking at what's already happened. Then when you go to the CVSA training, this to me was so valuable, was law enforcement's perspective on the roadside, because they're sharing the who's, the what's, the whys from their lens. And it is almost contradictory to industry lens. And there was times even my emotions got hot. So I'm like, that's not right. And I'm like, well, maybe from my perspective right now, it's not right, but from their training and their perspective, it is right. So being able, I would say, to navigate those three mindsets and those three perceptions was really important, because no one's perfect. But ultimately, everyone, I think it's safe to say, everyone wants to make it home safely. So when you can navigate a conversation with a disgruntled employee who just doesn't understand it, and you can explain, okay, this is what happens if you do it, you're going to get the ticket. This is what's going to happen through an audit, because there's points in the carrier profile. But this is also what law enforcement's going to see. And they're giving you one ticket instead of three because they wanted to be a nice person. Like, so just, I would say that well-rounded perspectives, again, like I'll keep going back to that word, is really useful. And that's just one example. The CTSP, which we're going to talk about a little bit too, same thing. But again, it's our industry offers it, which is very different than a lot of other industries. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, agreed. Did you find in the class that you had a lot of, was there a lot of industry representation in that CVSA training?
Yeah, it was probably, because there was two, part A, part B. So part A was driver requirement. So you basically go through a level 3 inspection. Part B was vehicle. So you go through, in essence, an entire level 1 inspection. And in attendance is probably 85%, like from a private carrier perspective. And then there was there was one guy, he was with the city of Calgary, and his perspective was very, I liked his perspective. He was a smart cat. And I was just like, okay, interesting how, again, it's just a different environment. But yeah, it was really well represented by industry for sure.
Awesome. That's good to hear. There used to be a pretty strong showing for industry when it came to the CVSA out of service inspection training. It was put on by Lethbridge College, and it would last, I believe it was 4 days. I might have gotten that wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 4 to 5 days. In industry was always welcome to participate, and I never did participate in that for a number of different reasons. But I do know that one thing that was really, really important to having industry involved in that kind of training alongside enforcement is, and this goes well beyond simply knowing what the regulator is looking for, what enforcement's looking for. The biggest and most important, most valuable thing there is bridging that knowledge gap and the experience gap between the carriers, the people that are doing the work, and the people who are regulating or enforcing. Anybody who's tried to use a policy or a procedure which is drafted entirely behind a desk in a safety guy's office or a safety person's office somewhere knows what it's like to try and implement a theoretically best plan versus, a group of people getting together from different perspectives, like you said, and talking about, well, if we do this, what's the implication? What does this mean? Right? So having industry present right alongside regulators and enforcement, it's fantastic, but it's also really easy to get sucked down that path of interpreting like an enforcement officer. And, I've met really a lot of fantastic people within the enforcement community over the years, had the pleasure of working right alongside a few of them in a collaborative sense, but they don't look at things the way a carrier safety person should necessarily look at it. And that difference in perspective on the issue, if it carries forward into the carrier and the safety person is now behaving like a cop, if you will, I'm sorry for using that term, but if they're behaving like that, then at the end of the day, they're alienating themselves and they're setting themselves up for let's say a confrontational relationship, or a relationship with their peers in that company that could turn confrontational, adversarial very, very quickly, because again, that's that enforcement perspective coming out, right?
Yeah, I think oftentimes, and this is no jab to safety professionals, because that's a space that we can identify with, but it literally is a tyrant attitude. And I think nothing crushes culture faster than I'm going to show you the hierarchy diagram every single time I talk to you. And I'm right here and you're down here. So you listen. Like, that is the most, again, I'm not from the 70s. I'm not from the 60s. So that's my analogies, and I could be completely wrong, but from my enough stories I've heard from that work generation, I don't think I'm too far off. But I'm like, I think that used to be the thing. I'm the captain, you're not. And it's like, yeah, you're right. But in today's day and age, especially when culture is extremely important, in my personal and professional opinion, where I'm like, you can tell me what to do, but you can tell me in such a way that I understand and I don't feel like you just hit me in the back with a whip. And I think when safety leaders, I talk about this term all the time, instead of leading with tyranny, we lead with empathy. And we can collectively come together, like you just said, figure out, okay, what is the best process? These are the rules we have to comply with. What's the best way to get there? And from that, you have buy-in, which to me is a huge part of retention. But you also get people that you didn't know were a vocal leader on your team because they're never in an environment to be so. And especially professional drivers that work by themselves. Like if you listen to them on the CB, if people still use CBs, you may see some vocal leadership. Aside from that, it's such quick interactions. If in person, now it's mostly electronic, where you're not going to see that skill set, or you're not going to be able to install that skill set. But if you can collectively say, okay, how are we going to move this piece of equipment from here to here with these are obstacles, this is the legislation we have to comply with, and you can lead that collectively. Yeah, again, we'll go back to culture, but that's a huge piece. And then it's famous though, like, oh, you're a safety cop? It's like, no, but far too often that's unfortunately what you'll see.
Yeah. And you know what? I'll tackle the last part about what you said after, but just to hone in on one of the first things you said, I don't know that it's ever been okay to be that safety cop. I think it was more prominent. It was a practice that existed. And typically it exists within groups or cultures that are a little less competent or knowledgeable when it comes to the why. Like, why are we doing some of the things that we're doing? At the end of the day, we have a significant problem when it comes to the way safety people are perceived in the workplace. It's not unique to transportation. It's not unique to any one sector. It's really a result of what you're describing there, this idea that you can do safety to people. You can't make somebody safe, right? You can't make an outcome safe. You can put the work in. But again, if you're doing it alone, you're in a vacuum and you're not going to get any of the support. You're not going to get any of the insight, any of the experience, all of those things that make you successful. The policing community has this concept called policing by consent. And it's this idea that if you want to effectively police a community, you need the community's consent to do so. So they're bought in, they're a part of the checks and balances that are required in order to ensure that the law enforcement agency is behaving in an ethical and consistent fashion with what the public wants. It's no different with a safety person. If you want a safe employer, if you want a safe company, if this is what you're tasked to do, you need their consent. And you only get there through involvement, proactive communication, respecting people's experience, and knowing that Joe may have driven for the last 25 years, 30 years. You may have 2 years experience. That's relative. That's totally relative, right? The quality of your experience, the quality of Joe's experience, they're two different baselines. You don't have a common benchmark to compare against. So I don't necessarily know the better way. Neither does Joe. But if we both come to the table and we both do it in a way that makes the most sense for the operation, that's most intuitive, that's simple, easy to implement, they're likely to do it. And they're likely to believe in it, right? So we could talk about culture, the effect of safety on culture. You can tell, you already know, I've got a few soapboxes. That's one of them.
No, it's true.
Anyone who wants to see me do that for 2 days straight. Energy Safety Canada, I do some instruction for Energy Safety Canada. And one course that I absolutely love to teach is supervisor leadership for health and safety. Every sector needs this. Every sector needs this. And this isn't me tooting my horn. They developed the course material. This is their course. But to be honest with you, the energy industry in a lot of ways kind of leads the charge when it comes to certain initiatives. And this is one of them, for sure. The idea that you can get all of your supervisors and management, people who lead others, which is kind of the key there, to come in and spend a couple of days in training, learning how to do it effectively and be competent in doing so. That's an idea that needs to grow well beyond the energy sector. That's got to grow.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And it was interesting watching your journey when you were first in conversation, then becoming obviously now certified, now training with them. It was really
Yeah.
cool to see. So something that really stands out with Eric is passion. And I ramble. That's when I know I'm passionate, is because I'm rambling. And Eric's face lights up. Like you can tell when he's like, man, I'm gonna roll, give him 2 days because he's gonna rock and roll. Like you just see his face literally elevate. And I'm just like, okay, here we go. So I think it's really nice to see in our space, because some topics that you can make exciting are so dead boring.
Oh,
And
thanks, man.
no, it's true though. You're like, man, let's really feed this. Like there's lots of information here. Let's unpack it, but let's also be competent in it so we can actually perform like we're being trained to perform. And I think that is so needed if it's the topic, but also just in training as a whole. And I really admire that, because that's an area where I'm always trying to get better. Is I'm like, okay, when do I elevate? When do I stay calm and let others speak? Like just trying to find those balances and stuff. That's something you do really well. But again, watching your journey has been really cool to watch, just the excitement come out and the fact that you're making a difference too. I think that's really crucial just in your journey. So yeah, I'm super grateful for that. It's super nice.
Awesome, man. Thanks for that. Okay, I'm going to put Josh on the spot for a second. We just finished doing a recording, and I really want to ask this question. What do you guys want to see? What kind of comments do you have? What kind of questions do you have? What would you like to see more of? Do you want to see a change in format, the addition of a new format? Do you want to see another channel entirely where all we do is discuss the news and different events as it affects transportation? Now's your chance. Put them on the spot too. Ask them questions.
Eric, thank you so much again for hopping on the podcast and just for another excellent conversation. Really appreciate just all of the insights and expertise that you shared. So those listening, as you just heard, Eric just gave us a challenge. He gave all of our listeners the challenge. What would you like Eric and I to dive into in the future? So let me know, send me a direct message or email me at pvtlindustry@gmail.com. So that way we can highlight exactly what it is you're concerned about, what you have questions about on future episodes. Again, I want to give a huge shout out to Pioneer Safety Solutions. So definitely check them out, pioneersafetysolutions.com. But before we end, I just want to say again, thank you so much to all of our dedicated listeners, as well as if this is the first time you've ever checked out a Truck Focus podcast. I really believe that you got a lot of value today. Hopefully you feel encouraged. You're going to check out some of the trainings that's available, but also you're going to reach out and say, hey, Josh, hey, Eric, what other opportunities exist in the industry? I have this experience or I have no experience, but I really want to get planted. What can I do? Please reach out. So again, that can be a direct message. That can be an email. All contact details, of course, are in the show notes. So again, just thank you so much for checking the episode out today. As always, let's create a pivotal impact.